The emergency alarms had been silent for 3 days now. Dr. Lyra pressed her crystalline palm against the observation window, watching the twisted metal that used to be a spacecraft settle deeper into the purple sand of Ketos 7th, the human. Vessel had crashed during the night cycle, its hull cracking open like an egg against the mineral-rich desert floor. "We should leave it alone," Supervisor Kale whispered behind her. His tall frame cast long shadows in the medical bay, his translucent skin glowing softly in the artificial light. "The galactic protocols are clear about primitive species. No contact, no interference." Lyra nodded slowly, but her large eyes remained fixed on the wreckage. The Alterans had followed these rules for 10,000 years, watching younger civilizations rise and fall without ever reaching out. It kept them safe, kept them peaceful, kept them hidden from the violent races that controlled most of the galaxy. But something was moving in the wreckage. The rescue team found the survivor 2 hours later, buried under a pile of cargo containers that should have crushed any living thing. The small creature was unconscious, bleeding from cuts across his pale skin, but his chest rose and fell with steady breaths. He looked impossibly fragile compared to the Alteran miners who carried him back to the settlement. "A juvenile," Elder Quinn observed, as they placed the boy on the medical table. The settlement's leader stood 7 feet tall, his ancient features carved from what looked like living crystal. His voice carried the weight of centuries. "Look at those proportions. This species matures differently than ours." Tommy Reed was 8 years old, though the Alterans had no way of knowing that. They discovered his name from a small identification tag around his neck, along with basic biological information that Dr. Lyra found fascinating. The human body was dense with muscle and bone, built for a high-gravity world. His brain showed unusual electrical activity even while unconscious. Most interesting of all, his wounds were already beginning to heal at a rate that seemed impossible. "His parents were on the ship," Kale reported after examining the wreckage more thoroughly. "Botanical researchers, according to their equipment. They were studying plant adaptation in low-atmosphere environments." He paused, his voice growing softer. "They did not survive the crash." Elder Quinn stood quietly for a long moment, studying the sleeping child. The boy's face was peaceful despite everything he had endured. His dark hair was matted with dried blood, but there was something about his expression that reminded the Elder of hope itself. "The protocols exist for good reasons," Quinn said finally. "Contact with primitive species has led to war, cultural contamination, exploitation. We have seen it happen to others." "But this is different," Lyra interrupted gently. "This is not contact. This is rescue. The child will die if we do nothing. And if we save him, then what? We cannot return him to his people. We do not even know where they come from. Do we keep him here forever? Do we try to raise him as one of us?" The medical equipment beeped softly as it monitored the boy's vital signs. His heartbeat was stronger than when they first brought him in. Whatever else humans were, they were survivors. "Look at him," Lyra said. "He is alone in the universe now. No family, no home, no one of his own kind. If we turn away, we are not following protocol. We are choosing to let a child die when we have the power to save him." Supervisor Kale shifted uncomfortably. "The Council of Worlds would not approve if they discovered we had contact with a pre-space civilization." "The Council of Worlds need not know," Elder Quinn said quietly. "Ketos 7th is far from the major shipping lanes. We have few visitors. The boy could live here safely while we search for others of his kind." The decision was made in that moment, though none of them understood the consequences it would bring. Elder Quinn authorized the medical treatment, and Dr. Lyra began the slow process of healing the human child. They used their most advanced regeneration technology, watching in amazement as his body responded faster than any Alteran patient ever had. Tommy woke up on the 4th day. His eyes opened suddenly, completely alert, scanning the room for threats, before focusing on Dr. Lyra. She had been reading beside his bed, enjoying the peaceful silence of the medical bay. When she looked up, she found herself staring into eyes that were darker and more intense than any she had ever seen. "Where am I?" he asked, in a language she did not recognize. But the translation device they had placed near his bed immediately converted his words to Alteran. His voice was higher than theirs, more musical, but there was something underneath it that seemed older than his years. "You are safe," Lyra replied, speaking slowly and clearly. "My name is Dr. Lyra. You were hurt, but you are better now. Do you remember what happened?" Tommy sat up carefully, looking around the medical bay with curious eyes. Everything was made of the same crystalline material, glowing softly with internal light. The ceiling was high and curved, more like a natural cave than a building. The air smelled different here, cleaner somehow. "The ship crashed," he said after a moment. "There was fire and noise, and then everything went dark." His face crumpled suddenly as memory returned. "Mom and Dad were with me. Are they okay? Where are they?" Dr. Lyra had spent 3 days preparing for this question, but she still found herself struggling for words. How did you tell a child that he was alone? How did you explain death to someone so young? "I am very sorry," she said gently. "Your parents did not survive the crash. You were the only one we found alive." Tommy stared at her for a long moment, and Lyra saw something flicker across his face. Pain, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like acceptance, as if he had already known the truth and was simply having it confirmed. "So I am alone now," he said. It was not a question. "No," Elder Quinn said from the doorway. He had been listening to the conversation, ready to step in if needed. "You are not alone. We saved you, and we will take care of you. You have a home here for as long as you need one." Tommy looked up at the tall alien with those intense dark eyes. "Why would you do that? I am not one of your kind." "Because," Elder Quinn said simply, "it was the right thing to do. Neither of them could have predicted that this single act of compassion would reshape the galaxy forever." The morning sun cast rainbow patterns through the crystal walls of the learning center as Tommy raced ahead of his Alteran classmates. 5 years had passed since the crash, and the human boy had grown taller and stronger, though he was still small compared to the alien children around him. His dark hair was longer now, tied back in the style favored by young Alterans, but his eyes remained as intense as ever. "Tommy, wait for us," called Nira, his closest friend among the Alteran youth. She moved with the graceful, measured steps of her people, never hurrying, never rushing. Her crystalline skin caught the light as she walked, creating patterns that shifted like living art. But Tommy had already reached the puzzle chamber where they spent their mornings. The room contained dozens of complex mechanical challenges designed to teach young Alterans how to think methodically and work together. Each puzzle required patience, careful analysis, and group cooperation to solve. Tommy was examining a new challenge that their instructor, Master Fell, had introduced that morning. It was a maze of interconnected tubes and chambers, with colored liquids that needed to be moved from one container to another following specific rules. The other students would spend weeks on this puzzle, working together to understand each component before attempting a solution. Tommy stared at it for 30 seconds, then began moving the controls rapidly. Within 5 minutes, all the liquids were in their correct positions. "How did you do that so quickly?" Nira asked, as she and the others finally caught up. They stared at the solved puzzle in amazement. Tommy shrugged, a gesture he had learned from old human video files Dr. Lyra had recovered from the crashed ship. "I do not know. I looked at it and I could see the pattern, like a map in my head." Master Fell floated into the chamber, his elderly form moving with the slow dignity that came with centuries of life. When he saw the completed puzzle, his large eyes widened in surprise. "Tommy, did you solve this alone?" "Yes, Master Fell." "Was I not supposed to? The rules did not say I had to wait for the others?" The instructor studied the solution carefully. It was not just correct, it was elegant. Tommy had found the most efficient path through the challenge, something that usually took even adult Alterans considerable time to discover. "Show me how you did it," Master Fell said. Tommy reset the puzzle and began again, this time explaining his thoughts as he worked. "The red liquid needs to end up here, but it cannot go directly because the blue liquid blocks this path. So I move the blue liquid here first, which opens this route, but that puts the blue in the wrong place. However, if I move the green liquid to this chamber, it pushes the blue exactly where it needs to be, and then the red can flow to its final position." The Alteran children listened in confusion. Tommy was thinking several steps ahead, seeing consequences and possibilities that they could not grasp. His mind worked differently than theirs, faster and more aggressively. Dr. Lyra watched from the observation room above, taking notes on her research tablet. She had been studying Tommy for 5 years now, documenting every aspect of his development. What she was learning worried her. Human brains were structured differently than Alteran minds. Where her people thought in straight lines, carefully examining each possibility before moving to the next, Tommy thought in webs of connection. He could hold multiple complex scenarios in his mind simultaneously, comparing outcomes and adjusting strategies in real time. "He is getting faster," she reported to Elder Quinn that evening. They met in the settlement's central garden surrounded by the bioluminescent plants that provided light during the night cycle. "His pattern recognition abilities are beyond anything we have seen, but more concerning is his approach to problem solving." "What do you mean?" "Watch this." Dr. Lyra activated a holographic display showing recordings from that morning's lesson. "See how he analyzes the puzzle? He is not just looking for a solution, he is looking for the best solution, the most efficient path, the one that gives him the greatest advantage." Elder Quinn studied the display thoughtfully. "That seems like intelligence, not a problem. But look at this other recording." The hologram changed to show Tommy playing with other children during recreation time. They were engaged in a simple game where players tried to collect colored stones from a central pile. "The rules are basic. Each player takes turns, one stone at a time, trying to collect matching sets." In the recording, Tommy was clearly thinking far beyond the simple rules. He was watching the other players, noting which stones they needed, and deliberately taking stones to prevent them from completing their sets. When Nira needed a blue stone to complete her collection, Tommy took it, even though he did not need it himself. "He is not just playing the game," Dr. Lyra explained. "He is playing against the other players. He thinks in terms of competition and conflict, even in activities designed to be cooperative." Elder Quinn was quiet for a long moment. "Perhaps this is simply how his species approaches challenges. It may not be malicious." "That is what worries me most," Dr. Lyra said. "I do not think it is malicious. I think it is natural. Tommy does not choose to think this way. He cannot help it." 3 weeks later, their concerns proved justified. A distress signal reached Ketos 7 from the mining colony on Ketos III. Drex raiders had attacked the outer system, destroying 2 cargo ships and demanding tribute from the remaining settlements. The Alterans responded as they always did. Elder Quinn sent diplomatic messages to the Drex fleet, offering to negotiate a peaceful resolution. He authorized increased security patrols and activated the colony's defensive shields. Everything was done according to established protocols that had kept their people safe for millennia. Tommy listened to the reports with growing frustration. He had been studying Alteran history and galactic politics as part of his education, and he could see patterns that the adults seemed to miss. "Why do you keep trying to talk to them?" he asked during one of the emergency council meetings. As the only human in the settlement, he was allowed to observe these discussions as part of his education, because dialogue is always preferable to violence. Elder Quinn replied patiently. The Drex are not evil, Tommy. They are simply following their nature, just as we follow ours. If we can understand their needs, perhaps we can find a solution that satisfies everyone. Tommy stared at the tactical display showing Drex ship movements. But they are not trying to satisfy everyone. Look at their pattern. They hit the outer colonies first, the ones with the weakest defenses. They demand tribute, but they also gather intelligence on your military capabilities. They are testing you. The council members exchanged glances. Tommy's analysis was uncomfortably accurate. Even if that is true, Supervisor Kale said, what would you have us do? Attack them? Start a war? No, Tommy said, his voice carrying a certainty that seemed strange coming from a 13-year-old. You make them think you are weak while you prepare to be strong. You give them what they expect to see while you get ready to show them something they do not expect. Elder Quinn looked at the human boy with new eyes. What exactly are you suggesting? Tommy moved to the tactical display and began pointing out ship positions and movement patterns. His suggestions were detailed, sophisticated, and absolutely ruthless. He proposed false retreats, misleading communications, and coordinated ambush, tactics that would leave the Drex fleet crippled and their leadership captured. The most disturbing part was how natural it sounded coming from him. Tommy was not trying to be clever or impress the adults. He was simply sharing what seemed obvious to him, the way an Alteran child might explain how to tend a garden. Dr. Lyra watched the council's reaction with growing dread. She could see the temptation in their eyes. Tommy's plan would work. It was brilliant, efficient, and completely contrary to everything the Alterans believed about themselves. We cannot do this, she said quietly. This is not who we are. Tommy looked at her with those intense dark eyes. Then who are you going to be when the Drex decide that talking is over and shooting begins? The question hung in the air like a challenge. For the first time in their long history, the Alterans had no answer. The attack came at dawn, just as Tommy had predicted it would. He stood in the command center of New Haven, the main settlement on Ketos VII, watching the tactical displays with the calm focus of someone much older than his 18 years. Around him, Alteran technicians worked frantically to coordinate their defenses, their crystalline fingers dancing over control surfaces as emergency alerts filled the air. 37 ships, reported Commander Vale, the settlement's military coordinator. His voice carried the strain of someone who had never expected to fight a real war. They are targeting our communication arrays first, then moving toward the residential sectors. Elder Quinn stood beside Tommy, his ancient face reflecting the glow of the warning lights. 5 years of intermittent Drex attacks had worn down his people's patience for diplomacy, but they still had no real idea how to fight back effectively. Each time they tried to resist, they lost more ships and colonies. Our defensive fleet is moving to intercept, Vale continued. Admiral Corps is leading 12 ships against their forward assault group. Tommy closed his eyes, visualizing the battle in 3 dimensions. He had been studying every Drex attack for years, mapping their tactics, learning their patterns. The Alterans fought like they lived, honorably and predictably. The Drex fought to win. Admiral Corps is flying into a trap, he said quietly. What do you mean? Elder Quinn asked. The 37 ships you detected? Those are not the real attack force. They are bait. Tommy moved to the main display and began highlighting ship positions. Look at the formation. They are spread out, too wide for an effective assault, but perfect for drawing your fleet into a specific area. The real attack is coming from here. He pointed to what appeared to be empty space on the edge of the system. Tommy, there is nothing there. Commander, Vale said. Our sensors show only asteroids and debris. Exactly. Which is the perfect place to hide if you have cloaking technology. The words had barely left his mouth when new contacts appeared on the display. 43 additional Drex ships dropped their stealth fields and began accelerating toward the planet's surface. Admiral Kor's fleet was caught completely out of position, chasing decoys while the real threat approached unopposed. "By the eternal stars," Vale whispered. "How did you know?" Tommy did not answer immediately. He was too busy calculating vectors and timing, seeing the battle unfold in his mind like a complex mathematical equation. The Alterans had always fought defensively, reacting to enemy moves instead of controlling the pace of battle. It was time to change that. "I need command authority," he said to Elder Quinn. "Tommy, you are not trained in military command. You have never even been on a warship. And Admiral Kor has been trained in military command for 50 years. And he is about to lose his entire fleet because he thinks like an Alteran instead of like an enemy." Tommy turned to face the Elder directly. "You saved my life 13 years ago. Trust me now to save yours." Elder Quinn stared into those dark human eyes, seeing something there that both frightened and fascinated him. Tommy was not asking for command. He was stating what needed to happen, with the same certainty he had once shown when solving puzzles as a child. "Do it," Quinn said quietly. Commander Vale looked shocked. "Elder, surely you cannot be serious. He is just a boy." "No," Quinn replied, watching as Tommy moved to the command console. "He is not. Tommy's first order was to recall Admiral Kor's fleet, not to defend the planet, but to regroup at the system's edge. His second was to activate every mining ship, cargo hauler, and maintenance drone in the system. His third was to begin broadcasting on all frequencies, claiming that the Alteran Defense Force was in full retreat." "What are you doing?" Vale demanded. "You are giving them the planet!" "I am giving them what they expect to see," Tommy replied, his fingers moving rapidly over the tactical controls. "The Drex think in terms of dominance and submission. They expect us to either fight honorably and lose, or surrender immediately. I am going to give them neither." The Drex fleet approached Keto 7 with growing confidence. Their sensors showed scattered Alteran ships fleeing in panic, defensive systems shutting down, and communication channels filled with surrender negotiations. It looked like their easiest conquest yet. The trap was sprung when the enemy fleet entered the planet's upper atmosphere. What had appeared to be fleeing civilian vessels suddenly revealed themselves as armed mining ships, their drilling equipment converted into weapons. Cargo haulers became missile platforms. Maintenance drones swarmed over the Drex ships like mechanical insects, attaching explosive charges to critical systems. But the real surprise was the planet itself. Tommy had turned the entire mining operation into a weapon. Precisely timed explosions sent streams of molten metal into the enemy formation. Electromagnetic pulse generators hidden in the industrial complex's disabled ship systems. The peaceful mining world had become a death trap. "Impossible," breathed Commander Vale, watching the tactical display as Drex ships began falling from the sky. "How did you coordinate all of this without them detecting the preparations?" "Because they were not looking for preparations," Tommy explained. "They were looking for traditional military assets, warships, defense platforms, organized resistance. They never considered that we might turn our entire civilian infrastructure into a weapon. The battle was over in 3 hours. Of the 80 Drex ships that had attacked, only 12 escaped to carry word of their defeat back to the Empire. The Alteran fleet had suffered minimal casualties, and the planet's surface installations were largely intact." News of the victory spread quickly through Alteran space. For the first time in their recorded history, they had not just survived an attack, but decisively defeated their enemies. Tommy became a hero overnight, his tactical innovations studied and praised throughout their civilization. But Dr. Lyra watched the celebration with growing unease. She had monitored Tommy throughout the battle, recording his biometric data and brain activity patterns. What she found disturbed her more than the violence itself. Tommy had enjoyed it. not in a cruel or sadistic way, but with the deep satisfaction of someone finally doing what they were born to do. His stress levels had actually decreased during the combat, his mind achieving a clarity and focus that she had never seen in any Alteran. For the first time since she had known him, Tommy had seemed completely at peace with himself. "He is not like us," she reported to Elder Quinn that evening. "The battle did not traumatize or disturb him. It energized him. His species is adapted for conflict in ways we cannot fully understand." "But he saved us," Quinn replied. "Without his intervention, we would have lost everything." "Yes, he saved us. But what has he awakened in the process?" Their answer came within the week. Delegations from 12 different species arrived on Ketos 7, all bearing the same request. They had heard about the human tactical genius who had defeated the Drex. They needed his help with their own enemies. The Zephyrians were being raided by the Corvin Horde. The Velothi were losing colonies to the Iron Reach. The peaceful hegemony worlds were under constant attack by the Crimson Fleet. Tommy listened to each delegation with growing interest. Each species told the same story. They were peaceful peoples facing aggressive enemies, trying to survive through diplomacy and defensive measures that were no longer working. They needed someone who could teach them how to fight back. "I can help you," Tommy told the assembled ambassadors, "but you must understand that what I teach you will change who you are. Once you learn to think like a warrior, you cannot unlearn it. Once you see the galaxy as a place of conflict and competition, you cannot return to innocence." The delegates looked at each other uncertainly. They had come seeking salvation, not transformation. "The choice is yours," Tommy continued. "You can remain as you are and hope your enemies show mercy, or you can become something new and take control of your own fate." One by one, they agreed to his terms. Dr. Lyra watched from the observation gallery as Tommy began his first formal lesson in human military doctrine. He stood before representatives of a dozen peaceful civilizations, teaching them concepts that had never existed in their cultures: preemptive strikes, psychological warfare, strategic deception. "What have we done?" she whispered to Elder Quinn. The ancient leader stood silently for a long moment, watching the human they had saved transform. The galaxy's understanding of war. "We saved a child," he said finally. "The rest was inevitable." The war room on the neutral station of Meridian Point buzzed with activity that would have been impossible just 5 years earlier. Representatives from 47 different species worked side by side, sharing intelligence, coordinating strategies, and planning operations that would have horrified their ancestors. At the center of it all, Tommy Reed moved between holographic displays like a conductor directing a vast orchestra of controlled violence. "The Corvin Horde is massing ships here," reported Ambassador Thran, her insectoid features animated with an intensity that her peaceful Zephyrian people had never known before. "Our scouts indicate they plan to strike the Hallis system within the next rotation." Tommy studied the tactical display, his now adult face marked by the kind of focus that came from years of thinking in terms of life and death. At 25, he had become something unique in the galaxy, a human raised by aliens, teaching warfare to species that had never known conflict. "How many ships?" he asked. 237 heavy cruisers, plus support vessels. "And your defensive capabilities?" "We have 42 ships positioned at Hallis, plus the orbital defense platforms you helped us design." Tommy nodded, already calculating possibilities. "Not enough for a direct confrontation. We need to change the battlefield." He moved to the main display and began highlighting star systems. "The Corvins are expecting you to meet them at Hallis. Instead, you are going to let them take it." The Zephyrian delegation looked shocked. Ambassador Thren's wings fluttered in distress. "Let them take it? There are 60 million civilians on Hallis Prime. Who will be evacuated before the attack begins?" Tommy replied calmly. "The Corvins want territory and resources. Give them an empty system full of traps and surveillance equipment. Let them spread out to occupy and fortify their new conquest. Then we hit them when they are scattered and vulnerable. He outlined the strategy in detail. False evacuations that left hidden observation posts, supply caches that were actually bombs, infrastructure that would turn against its new occupiers. At predetermined signals, it was brutal, efficient, and completely contrary to everything the Zephyrians had once believed about honorable conduct. But it would work. Tommy's strategies always worked. Across the war room, similar conversations were taking place. The Velathi were learning how to conduct deep space raids against Iron Reach supply lines. The hegemony worlds were implementing early warning networks that would give them hours instead of minutes to prepare for attacks. Former victims were becoming predators, and former prey were learning to hunt. Dr. Lyra observed it all from her research station, documenting the transformation of galactic civilization. She had followed Tommy from Keto 7 to Meridian Point, ostensibly to continue her studies of human psychology, but really because she could not look away from what was happening. The Crystalline Compact signed the Mutual Defense Pact today, she reported to Elder Quinn during their weekly communication. That makes 31 species now committed to Tommy's strategic alliance. Elder Quinn's image flickered slightly in the holographic display. Even across interstellar distances, she could see the weariness in his ancient features. And how many have actually used his teachings in combat? 18 confirmed engagements in the past month alone. The success rate is concerning. Concerning. How? Dr. Lyra pulled up her statistical analysis. Tommy's students have achieved a 96% victory rate against previously dominant, aggressive species. The Corvin Horde has lost 12 systems in the past year. The Iron Reach is requesting peace negotiations. The Crimson Fleet has actually retreated from 3 sectors entirely. That sounds like success, not cause for concern. That is the problem. The species Tommy is teaching are not just defending themselves anymore. They are expanding. The Zephyrians have claimed 4 systems that were never theirs to begin with. The Velathi are imposing tribute on worlds that they claim are strategically significant. They are using human military doctrine not just to survive, but to conquer. Elder Quinn was quiet for a long moment. What does Tommy say about these expansions? That they are natural consequences of strength. He says that once a species learns to project power effectively, they inevitably use that power to secure advantages. He calls it strategic depth and claims it is necessary for long-term survival. The truth was more complex than Dr. Lyra could easily explain. She had watched Tommy evolve from a teacher of pure defensive tactics to something approaching a galactic strategist. His students came to him with simple requests for help against immediate threats, but he gave them comprehensive philosophies of power projection and resource control. You cannot just defend, Tommy had told the latest group of ambassadors. Defense is reactive. It means your enemies choose when and where to fight. You need to be proactive. You need to make them react to you. The transformation was visible in every species he worked with. The Zephyrians, once known for their beautiful poetry and philosophical debates, now produced some of the galaxy's most effective military intelligence officers. The Velathi had converted their peaceful trading fleets into rapid response strike forces. The hegemony worlds, formerly a loose confederation of independent planets, had become a centralized military state. Each change made perfect sense in isolation. Why should poets not also be spies when information was the key to survival? Why? Should traders not be warriors when their roots needed protection? Why should independent worlds not coordinate their defenses when unity meant strength? But taken together, the changes were adding up to something unprecedented in galactic history. Peaceful species were becoming militaristic ones. Defensive alliances were becoming offensive coalitions. The careful balance between predator and prey civilizations that had existed for millennia was collapsing into universal competition. Tommy seemed genuinely unaware of the broader implications of his work. When Dr. Lyra tried to discuss her concerns with him, he listened politely but dismissed her fears as typical Alteran overcaution. "You are worried because your people have been safe for so long that you have forgotten what the galaxy is really like," he told her one day as they walked through Meridian Point's observation deck. The stars beyond the viewport seemed different now, marking not points of light but strategic positions in a vast game of territorial control. "The galaxy has always been violent. Your species succeeded by hiding from that violence. But others do not have that option. The Zephyrians cannot make themselves invisible. The Velothi cannot retreat to isolated systems. They have to learn to fight, or they will be destroyed." "But they are not just learning to fight," Dr. Lyra argued. "They are learning to conquer. There is a difference." Tommy stopped walking and turned to face her. His human eyes still held the same intensity they had carried as a child, but now there was something else there. Authority, certainty, the kind of absolute confidence that came from being right so many times that contradiction seemed impossible. "Is there?" he asked. "Can you show me a species that learned to defend itself effectively without eventually using those same skills to expand its territory? Can you name a civilization that developed real military power and then chose to remain weak forever?" Dr. Lyra tried to think of examples, but found herself struggling. Every successful species in the galaxy had gone through periods of expansion and conquest. Even the Alterans had claimed dozens of systems in their ancient past before they had chosen isolation over growth. "The difference is choice," she said finally. "These species are not choosing to become conquerors. They are being transformed by the knowledge you give them." "Knowledge transforms everyone who receives it," Tommy replied. "That is what knowledge does. You cannot teach someone to think strategically and expect them to continue thinking like a victim. You cannot show someone how to project power and expect them to choose weakness." The conversation haunted Dr. Lyra for weeks afterward. She began monitoring communications from the species Tommy had trained, looking for patterns in their behavior. What she found confirmed her worst fears. The crystalline compact was no longer content with mutual defense. They were discussing preventive interventions against species that might become threats in the future. The Zephyrian Intelligence Corps was conducting espionage operations against neutral worlds to assess their military capabilities. The Velothi Defense Force had renamed itself the Velothi Expansion Fleet. Even more disturbing was how they justified these actions to themselves. Each species had developed elaborate philosophical frameworks that made their aggressive behavior seem not just reasonable, but morally necessary. They spoke of strategic imperatives and defensive expansion and preemptive peacekeeping with the same earnest conviction that they had once used to discuss art and philosophy. They had learned to think like humans. Dr. Lyra's final report to Elder Quinn contained a single terrifying conclusion. Tommy was not just teaching military tactics. He was spreading human psychology itself, the way of thinking that made humans such effective warriors. And like a virus adapting to new hosts, human strategic thinking was transforming every species it touched into something more competitive, more aggressive, more dangerous. "What do we do?" Elder Quinn asked after reviewing her data. Dr. Lyra looked out at the stars, now seeing not the peaceful galaxy of her youth, but a vast battlefield where every species was learning to think like humanity's most dangerous predators. "I think it may already be too late to do anything," she said quietly. "Tommy has not just changed the balance of power in the galaxy. He has changed the nature of intelligence itself." The message reached Tommy on his 40th birthday, delivered by an encrypted quantum relay that had taken 3 months to traverse the galaxy. He read it alone in his private quarters aboard the strategic command vessel Harmony, surrounded by the tactical displays and communication arrays that had become his life's work. The words were simple, but they hit him like a physical blow. Ketos 7 is under siege. We need to talk. Elder Quinn. Tommy stared at the message for a long time, remembering the peaceful crystal gardens where he had first learned to walk among the Alterans. The irony was not lost on him that his adopted homeworld was now threatened by the very forces he had helped create. He issued orders to his fleet commanders and set course for the Ketos system, knowing he was probably flying toward the end of everything he had built. The journey took 2 weeks, during which Tommy monitored reports from across the galaxy with growing dread. The siege of Ketos 7 was just one crisis among many. The Zephyrian Confederation had declared war on the hegemony worlds over disputed mining rights. The Velothi expansion fleet was demanding tribute from neutral systems that had once been their trading partners. The Crystalline Compact was conducting police actions against any species that refused to join their growing empire. Most disturbing of all were the reports about Earth. Human exploration fleets had finally reached this sector of the galaxy, arriving to find not the primitive civilizations their long-range surveys had predicted, but a collection of militarized species armed with suspiciously familiar tactics. First contact protocols had quickly broken down into armed standoffs when human commanders recognized their own strategic doctrines being used against them. The blockade around Ketos 7 was maintained by ships Tommy recognized. Zephyrian stealth, cruisers, their hulls painted with the flowing script that had once adorned poetry collections. Velothi assault carriers, converted from the peaceful trading vessels he remembered from his youth. Even ships from the hegemony worlds, their weapon systems based on designs he had personally approved. "They are not firing on the planet," reported Commander Nash, Tommy's chief of staff. She was a Alteran who had joined his organization 5 years earlier, one of the few of her species to embrace his military teachings. "But they are preventing any ships from leaving or entering the system. Classic siege tactics." Tommy nodded grimly. "They learned well. Signal the blockade fleet. Tell them I want to speak with their commanders." The response came back within minutes. "They say they will allow you safe passage to the planet's surface, but your fleet must remain at the system's edge. No weapons, no escorts, no backup." It was exactly what Tommy would have demanded in their position. Total control of the tactical situation, minimal risk of treachery, maximum psychological pressure on the opponent. He had taught them to think like this. The shuttle ride to Ketos 7's surface gave Tommy time to think about the irony of his situation. The peaceful world that had saved him as a child was now surrounded by enemies he had created. The species he had helped survive were now threatening the one place in the galaxy that had ever felt like home. Elder Quinn met him at the landing pad, and Tommy was shocked by how much the ancient Alteran had aged. His crystalline features were clouded with stress fractures, his movements slow and uncertain. The years of watching his peaceful galaxy transform into a battlefield had taken their toll. "Hello, Tommy," Quinn said quietly. "Thank you for coming." They walked together through the settlement that Tommy remembered from his childhood, but everything had changed. The crystal buildings were reinforced with armor plating. The gardens were interrupted by defensive installations. Even the peaceful Alterans moved with the cautious awareness of people who had learned to expect attacks. "Tell me what happened," Tommy said as they reached the central council chamber. Elder Quinn activated a holographic display showing the recent history of the sector. "It began 6 months ago. The Zephyrian Confederation demanded that we choose sides in their conflict with the hegemony worlds. When we refused, they declared us a strategic liability and imposed economic sanctions. The Velothi followed with similar demands. Then the Crystalline Compact offered us protection in exchange for exclusive mining rights to our outer system worlds." Tommy studied the timeline, seeing the familiar pattern of escalation and pressure that he had taught to dozens of species. "And when you refused all of them?" They formed a joint blockade to force our compliance. They say we are too valuable, to remain neutral, too dangerous to ignore, and too weak to resist. They are probably right. The irony was overwhelming. The Alterans had saved Tommy from isolation and loneliness, giving him a home and a family when he had nothing. In return, he had taught their galaxy how to make war so effectively that peace itself had become impossible. "There is something else," Elder Quinn continued. "Dr. Lyra has been monitoring galactic communications. The situation is worse than you know." Dr. Lyra entered the chamber, looking older and more tired than Tommy remembered. Her research equipment was more sophisticated now, but her expression carried the same concern it had when she first studied him as a child. "The transformation is accelerating," she reported without preamble. "Every species you trained has become a teacher in turn. They are spreading human strategic thinking to their neighbors, their allies, their conquered territories. The psychological virus you introduced is replicating across the galaxy." She activated her own displays, showing communication intercepts and behavioral analysis from hundreds of worlds. "Look at this. The Corvin Horde, which your students defeated so thoroughly, has now adopted human tactical doctrines and resumed their expansion. The Iron Reach has reorganized their entire society around your concepts of strategic efficiency. Even species that have never had direct contact with your teachings are changing, adapting to survive in a galaxy where human-style thinking has become the norm." Tommy examined the data with the analytical mind that had made him such an effective teacher. The scope of the transformation was breathtaking. His influence had spread far beyond the species he had personally trained, creating ripple effects that touched every corner of known space. "How long before it reaches Earth?" he asked quietly. "Human exploration fleets are already reporting contact with militarized civilizations in the Outer Rim," Dr. Lyra replied. "They are confused because their surveys predicted primitive societies, not advanced military powers using Earth-standard tactics. First contact situations are becoming increasingly hostile as both sides recognize each other as potential threats." Tommy closed his eyes, seeing the inevitable future spreading out before him like a tactical display. When humans finally reached this part of the galaxy in force, they would find not the primitive civilizations they expected to easily dominate, but species that had learned to think and fight like humans themselves. The result would be a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. "I need to see the blockade commanders," Tommy said finally. The meeting took place on a neutral platform at the edge of the system, with representatives from all three allied fleets. Tommy recognized some of them from his teaching years, former students who now commanded fleets and spoke with the authority of experienced conquerors. "Tommy Reed," Admiral Keth of the Zephyrian Confederation said, with what might have been fondness. "The great teacher comes home at last." "Admiral," Tommy replied formally, "I understand you have demands regarding the Alteran worlds." "Not demands. Offers of mutual benefit." Admiral Keth was a graceful insectoid creature whose species had once been known for their artistic achievements. Now she spoke in the clipped, efficient language of military pragmatism. "The Alterans possess strategic resources and occupy key hyperspace routes. In the current environment, neutrality is a luxury no one can afford." "The current environment that I helped create," Tommy said. "That we all helped create," corrected General Voss of the Velothi expansion fleet. He was a tall, elegant being whose people had once been peaceful traders. "You gave us the tools, but we chose how to use them. You taught us to think strategically. But strategy is not just about defense. It is about securing advantages, controlling resources, eliminating potential threats before they become actual ones." Tommy looked around the table at his former students, seeing the logical conclusion of everything he had taught them. They were not evil, or even particularly cruel. They were simply applying human strategic thinking to galactic politics, following the implications of his teachings to their natural conclusions. "And the Alterans represent a potential threat?" he asked. "They represent an unknown variable," replied Coordinator Zane of the Crystalline Compact. "A species that refuses to choose sides, claims neutrality, and possesses advanced technology. In a galaxy where every other civilization has committed to strategic alliances, they are an anomaly that could destabilize any careful balance of power." Tommy understood their logic because he had taught it to them. In a universe of competing powers, neutrality was indeed a threat. The Alterans' refusal to join any alliance made them potential allies for anyone, which made them potential enemies for everyone. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Convince them to choose wisely," Admiral Keth said. "Join our Confederation voluntarily or face the consequences of continued isolation." Tommy returned to Ketos 7 with a heavy heart, knowing that he carried the same message that had doomed countless worlds across the galaxy. Choose a side or be destroyed by all sides. Submit to the new order or be eliminated as a threat to stability. Elder Quinn listened to the ultimatum with the calm acceptance of someone who had seen this moment coming for years. "So this is how it ends," he said quietly. "Not with invasion or conquest, but with forced choice. Join the galaxy we helped create, or be destroyed by it." They stood together in the Crystal Garden, where Tommy had first learned to walk as a human child among alien foster parents. The bioluminescent plants still glowed with their gentle light, but even they seemed dimmed by the weight of what was happening. "I am sorry," Tommy said, the words feeling completely inadequate. "I thought I was saving people. I thought I was teaching them how to protect themselves." "You were," Elder Quinn replied. "But protection and conquest are not as different as we once believed. You showed the galaxy how to be strong, and strength inevitably seeks to grow stronger. What will you do?" Elder Quinn was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars that no longer represented peaceful exploration, but strategic positions in an endless game of power. "We will choose," he said finally, "because you have taught the galaxy that not choosing is also a choice and not a safe one." The surrender ceremony took place a week later. The Alterans formally joined the Zephyrian Confederation, becoming the newest members of an alliance that controlled over 200 systems. It was a peaceful transition, handled with diplomatic courtesy and strategic wisdom. But Tommy knew it was also the end of something precious. The last truly neutral species in the galaxy had been forced to take sides, not through conquest, but through the inexorable logic of strategic necessity. Peace itself had become impossible in a universe where every civilization had learned to think like a predator. As he prepared to leave Ketos 7 for the last time, Tommy received a final message from Dr. Lyra. "The human exploration fleets have accelerated their expansion schedule. They will reach the core worlds within 5 years. When they arrive, they will find a galaxy that has learned to think like them, fight like them, and hate like them. The war that follows will reshape everything." Tommy looked out at the stars one final time, seeing not the peaceful lights of his childhood, but the markers of an inevitable conflict. The galaxy he had helped create was about to meet the species that had created him. Both sides would fight with human cunning, human strategy, and human ruthlessness. He had saved a few species from extinction, but in doing so, he had doomed the galaxy to become what humanity had always been, a place where only the strongest and most ruthless could survive. Elder Quinn had been right from the beginning. They had saved a human child, and it had doomed their species. Not to conquest or destruction, but to transformation into something they had never wanted to become. The age of peace was over. The age of human thinking had begun, and there was no going back.